Hi, my name's John, and we're on Dorothea's program, Choices. Dorothea is away today, and she's graciously allowed us this opportunity to speak about Proposition 37, which is on the November 6th ballot. It has to do with our right to know and whether or not it's okay for us to have our foods labeled if they contain genetically modified organisms. I have two men here who have been traveling all over Southern California these past weeks promoting the passage of this proposition. And I'd like to ask John here, who's sitting right next to me on my right, about the advertising blitz that I've been seeing on television. I understand the opposition to this proposition has spent over $41 million now in advertising.
Yes, John, you're so right. I'm John Diaz. I'm with the California Right to Know. This bill is for the right to know what they put in our food. And yeah, there's a lot of ads. They're spending right now up to $50 million. Chemical companies are spending $1 million a day here in California. It's our basic right to know what's in our food. Okay, one of the misconceptions, lies, misinformation. Why is dog food labeled and not milk and meats? Well, there's a simple answer to that, and this bill is for the labeling of plants and animals, if there would be, that contain that have been genetically engineered. In a laboratory, they have been genetically engineering the seeds of the crops that we eat. And as of this moment, cows have not been genetically engineered, so they're not included in this bill. Do they have GMOs? Yes, they have indirectly, but you got to understand that in California, initiatives are very specific in the writing. Otherwise, they're not going to hold up in court, There's another issue as far as, well, it labels this and that. Alcohol, for instance, is not covered under this initiative. That's because alcohol is a federal law, and we can't do that in California. And it has to be that's under a food. This is under food. That's under beverages. It's a whole separate thing here. You have to understand that when they cigarette smoking, okay. When they had to prove that it was harmful, right? And then after it was proved harmful, banning cigarette smoking in public came later, right? Okay. So we could address these things later in another amendment. We vote on that, and we have changes. This is how things are done. Yeah. So
there are some perceived shortcomings to this bill, but it's a good first step.
As Howard will attest, that this bill was written by, it's a true grassroots. It was written by farmers, people in the industry, to help us transition into labeling. We allow for 5 to 10% of GMOs in the food, for the first 5 years, because we need to transition into this, and we can't have problems with our cost, and we can't shut things down that way. We have to let business operate. And so for the first 5 years we allow GMOs to be in the food, and then in Europe it's close to 0%, zero tolerance in Europe.
Now I've heard there's at least 40 countries, including Japan and China, that require GMO labeling.
Well, that's true. They're labeled, and in a lot of countries they're banned. There's a mountain of evidence that say that these things are harmful. But what we have in this country is, the consumer has to prove beyond a shadow of doubt that these foods are harmful to us. Now you'd think that that's up to, our government, but no, that's up to the consumer. We have a sue me attitude. In Europe, they have the precautionary method. Yes, and so if things are found to be harmful, maybe the problem here is that these foods have, regardless what anybody says, the truth of the matter is these foods have only been tested for 3 months. 3 months period. And for something that can change our whole agriculture, it's astounding. You know?
You mean when a genetically engineered food is introduced to the market, prior to that time, they test it for only 3 months?
Well, yeah, and then that's all, you know. And Monsanto, because this is a proprietary ingredient, the seeds are patented, and you know, this is. Let me just explain one thing. This is taking genes from other animals and other species and doing cross species, and they're putting it in a laboratory. They're putting it into the seed, and these plants, they grow up and they become GMO, and they have different traits. So one of the traits is they put this toxin, it's a Bt toxin, and it causes the insects, they take a bite of the crop, the corn, soy, that grow in the fields, and causes their bellies to pop open. And Howard will explain this later on.
Okay.
And the other thing is they allows them to put an herbicide directly on top of our food. You know, herbicides before. Another name for herbicides is poison. You know, when we were kids, my parents taught me to keep the poison separate from where you're handling your food. Now they've genetically engineered this to put directly on our food, which brings us to a great topic, is that a lot of people have been saying that this genetically engineering has been going on for 10,000 years. Well, that's plant to plant, and Howard will go into that. He's the farmer. He's the farmer from Iowa. But that's plant to plant. And let's put it this way, okay? Roundup is what has been 1974, is it, Howard?
Yes.
Yeah, 1974 is when they first made Roundup, and so the seeds have been genetically engineered to have Roundup put on them. First 1974, that's not too long ago, really.
No, so it's less than 30 years.
Yeah, less than 30 years.
There hasn't been genetically engineered seeds that long.
Yeah, there haven't been genetically engineered seeds that long, and you know well, I tell you what, we're a little pressed for time.
Yeah.
Maybe we can bring Howard on. I'm a volunteer leader for the California Right to Know.
Okay.
I walk from Brooklyn to the White House, and I've been educating people regarding their food and letting them know what's going on with their agriculture and things they're eating, and you know, we're going to vote on it soon, and so what do you say we bring on Howard?
Okay, given our time constraints, Howard, welcome to the show, and
Thank you, John.
for being here. We appreciate you coming out from Iowa to be with us and share some of your time. And I'm just kind of curious why you feel so that this is such an important issue that you would come out here to promote its passage.
I have studied GMO since 1994 and witnessed the negative effects of the genetically engineered crop when fed to livestock. And because of that, I've become involved with scientists and researchers from around the world that do independent research, not industry-sponsored research. And it would be fairly safe to generalize the industry-sponsored research as being set up to not find anything wrong in the design of the study. So it's easy for them to say that it's safe because their studies are inadequate, and there's been independent studies that have documented that fact. And there are more and more independent studies that are documenting the harm to mammals that are consuming the genetically engineered crop, as well as significant harm from glyphosate, which is the active chemical ingredient in Roundup.
All right. So this food is dangerous to us, this GMO food.
We believe it is, yes.
Yeah. It's my understanding that the DNA is altered inside the genes. Excuse me, the genes are altered inside the DNA, the sequence is changed, and
they are taking specific events from unlike species and transferring them in vitro in the laboratory. And as John mentioned, there are those that claim we've been doing this for thousands of years. That is completely untrue, because this in vitro process eliminates the asexual process that occurs between conventional plant breeding. And that's not the case. So the people that are making that statement are significantly misleading the public about how this process happens.
It's been promoted in the media that this is just an extension of traditional crossbreeding within a species, and it's the next logical step, this genetic engineering, but it's actually risky business.
Yes, and there have been numerous scientific studies by extremely qualified scientists that document that fact.
Okay, so I understand you brought some of your slide presentation that you've been showing around Southern California for us to look at and ponder some facts that we might find disturbing.
Yes, if we could have that shown on the screen,
Okay,
please.
could we switch to the camera, to the screen now, something the viewers could see, and how it'll provide a narrative?
It's entitled Genetically Modified Organisms, A Short History and Side Effects of GMOs is how we'll refer to the genetically modified organism crops. Next slide, please. We'd like for people to consider what the motivation is of this. We've been told that we're going to grow more food. Nobody would disagree with the fact that we need more food for the growing population. We've been told that they'll enhance the nutrient content. Is this the true motivation? Is the motivation the drought tolerance of the crops that they say that they're going to give us? Is the motivation insect resistance in plants? Are there side effects to that? Is the motivation herbicide tolerance to plants? So next slide, please. The technology fees are the royalties that the company that holds the patent on the genetically engineered crops collect. We're told that when we are really forward-thinking, we will implement this technology on all of the acres that we have in the United States. So we did the math of what the technology fees will generate for revenue for the companies holding the patents on these different crops only in the U.S. based on the technology fees as they were listed in the year 2010. As you see on this slide, if all of the acres that were planted in corn that year at the planting rate which we have listed, it would generate $60 per acre technology fee for a total of $5,274 million just for corn for that given year. Next slide, please. In soybeans, we do the same math. $1,893,600,000 technology fee generated by all of the acres if they were planted to genetically engineered crops that year. Next slide, please. In cotton, we see a gross figure of $850,200,000 for the year, only in that given year. Next slide, please. In cotton, we'd like to take a brief walk down memory lane and look at the history. Cottonseed was $45 to $60 per bag in 1993. In 2010, it's no longer a 50-pound bag, it's less than that. They sell it by seed count. And the seed cost is $159.99 per bag. The technology fee is $412.20 per bag. And the seed treatment, which is a combination of insecticide, fungicide, and pneumaticide, which is necessary because of the degradation that the glyphosate causes to the soil and the beneficial organisms, these opportunistic insects and organisms require this seed treatment in order to get a viable stand. So the seed cost went from $45 to $60 per bag up to $697.19 per bag. Next slide, please. In canola, which the majority of the canola that's raised in the world is raised in Canada, but the limited amount in our country is $9 million. Next slide, please. Sugar beets is, and again using 2,000-year figures, would be $96 million. We didn't have the numbers yet for the Roundup Ready alfalfa, what tech fees would be generated there, but you can see at a cumulative total, if all of the acres of all of these crops were used with technology and that fee was paid as it was assessed in the crop year 2010, that would give us just under $9 billion worth of technology fees to the GM industries that hold the patents on these crops. Would that explain some of the motivation behind the genetically engineered crops? Next slide, please. The biggest concern of the pioneering scientists that studied GMOs is the foreign proteins that are the result of the genetically engineered process. This has been documented numerous times by independent research that's properly designed over a lengthy period of time rather than the 14-day or 21-day or 30-day or 90-day studies that the industry has used to supposedly prove that they're safe. The immune system is significantly challenged of an animal when this foreign protein enters the immune system, or it enters the digestive tract, and the immune system is alerted, and it goes on the offensive, and it tries to get rid of this foreign protein, and it works 24/7. Next slide, please. This immune system activity causes a weakening immune system, thus the increase of the autoimmune diseases that we're witnessing in both animals and humans. This slide is to preface some pictures that we're going to show where we took pictures of hog stomachs in a hog slaughter plant. We have a stomach of a hog that was never fed a genetically engineered crop, and we have 3 pictures of hogs that were fed genetically engineered crop, and I'll explain each picture to you as they come up. Next slide, please. This is a healthy hog stomach. You can notice the overall skin tone color of the stomach. Next slide, please. This is one from a hog that was fed on a natural quote-unquote feed program where no drugs or antibiotics were used, but there was no restriction on feeding the GMO. You can see significant irritation and inflammation pronounced throughout the stomach, and you see several open sores, which are actually ulcers, in the folds of the stomach. Next slide, please. This is a hog that was fed antibiotics for its lifetime. You see a pale appearance of the overall appearance of the stomach, which the antibiotics definitely lessen the irritation and inflammation that will be caused by these foreign proteins. But you can see there are numerous ulcers that have healed over in the stomach. So even though the antibiotics lessen the inflammation and the irritation, the ulcers are still present. Next slide, please. This is a picture of beef cattle. After they've been butchered and skinned, you can see on the left, this one has been fed non-GMO feedstuffs, and the one on the right has been fed GMO feedstuffs. As you see, the one on the left, has the fat and the lining of the body cavities are white, which designates pureness in the feeding of this animal, and that it wasn't ingesting a bunch of contaminants. The one on the right, where the fat is darker and yellow and discolored, signifies the fact that as the impurities accumulate in the fat tissue, that shows the discoloration. Next slide, please. We're told that GMOs will increase yields. It used to be legal for our land-grant universities to do research comparing a conventional hybrid to a genetically engineered version of that. Back in those days, research from the University of Nebraska documented a yield drag when they inserted the Roundup Ready gene in the soybean plant. There was also a scientific study published by the Union of Concerned Scientists that documented the failure to yield of the genetically engineered crops that they were introducing to the market. So today, these scientists at our land-grant universities no longer have the ability to research this. There was a letter written and signed by 26 entomologists from our land-grant colleges and sent to the EPA that documented the fact that they don't have access to these seeds to test them to see if they are viable and actually doing what the companies say that they are doing. Next slide, please. We're also seeing an increase in insecticide use. The neonicotinoid insecticides are applied to the bulk of the corn and soybean seeds across our country. Unless you pre-order in advance, the seed comes with that treatment applied to the seed, and it's included in the price without an option to the farmer. These neonicotinoid insecticides have been banned in Germany and most of the European countries because it has been scientifically documented that they are directly contributing to the colony collapse disorder of the honeybee. We need the honeybee in order to pollinate many of the food crops we have in our country. Next slide, please. We're also seeing the pest that the Bt toxin is supposed to get rid of in our crops developing resistance. This is a picture of the adult rootworm beetle in South Dakota. Next slide, please. As you can see, there's very few kernels on this ear of corn because of that rootworm pest stopping pollination. There's corn also laying down in an adjacent picture where the rootworm larva has eaten the roots off of the corn plant and it has fallen down. This resistance by the rootworm has been documented in South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Illinois. All of the universities have documented the pests developing resistance to this. Next slide, please. We're told that the genetically engineered crops would reduce herbicide usage. As you can see, the original application rate of Roundup herbicide or glyphosate-based herbicides was 32 ounces per acre. In Ohio in the crop year 2010, I know of producers, traditional, conventional, mainstream farmers, that applied as much as 96 ounces of glyphosate in a single application to try and kill the weeds that are developing resistance to glyphosate. Next slide, please. There's also a study published by Dr. Charles Benbrook. After 13 years of genetically engineered crops, he looked at the increase in pesticide use as a result of genetic engineering. And in the 2008 crop year, in that specific year alone, it required 26% more pesticide to raise that crop than it did the conventional counterpart. He also did a study on 16 years after GMO, and more on a worldwide basis, we saw a 404 million pound increase in the use of pesticides, or 7% over what we had previously. In Argentina, you can see in 1996, they used 2 liters per hectare of glyphosate-based herbicides to control weeds. And in 2009 and 2010, it was up to 10 to 20 liters per hectare to try and control the weeds that had developed the glyphosate resistance. Next slide, please. Glyphosate is the active chemical ingredient in Roundup herbicide and many other glyphosate-based herbicides. Next slide, please. Glyphosate is a very strong metal chelator. It chelates calcium, magnesium, manganese, zinc, iron, copper, nickel, cobalt, boron, selenium, and potassium. Wherever the glyphosate is present, it will chelate these nutrients. Whether it's in the soil or in the plant or in the grain or in the stover of the crop, this chelation occurs. It is also a very strong biocide or antibiotic. It is very damaging to beneficial organisms in the soil. It also, as it damages the beneficial organisms, these are the control organisms that would keep many of our opportunistic organisms in check. It also acts as a food source for the opportunistic organisms, specifically several families of fungi. As these opportunistic fungi increase, it increases plant disease, which increases a demand and a need for fungicidal applications in order to raise a healthy crop. This compound effect of the chelating aspects of glyphosate, as well as the damaging effect of the biocidal effect, killing the beneficial organisms and promoting the bad, makes it a very toxic substance, and it does not break down and go away easily. Next slide, please. It has been scientifically documented numerous times that glyphosate will not kill a plant without the presence of opportunistic organisms in the soil. As this slide demonstrates, there are 3 edible bean plants were planted in these pots. The one on the left was sprayed with glyphosate, but it was in sterile soil. When there was no opportunistic organisms there, it did not kill the plant. The one on the right was the control. Next slide, please. Thus, the development of weeds that cannot be killed with any amount of glyphosate. This is the amaranth pigweed in Georgia. Next slide, please. We see here a cornfield in Iowa in August in 2010. The green field is a non-GMO cornfield that's healthy, like it should be, in the first week of August. The surrounding fields that were sprayed with glyphosate are unhealthy and look like they've been killed by frost. Next slide, please. We're also seeing an accumulation of these glyphosate residues in significant levels in the soil, in the air, in all sorts of crops. Next slide, please. We're also seeing the birth defects being significantly documented because of this glyphosate residue.
Howard, I hate to interrupt you and stop you with all this information you're sharing with us, but it's getting near the end of our 30-minute allotted time. I would like to thank both of you for coming today.
Thank you, John.
You know,
Thank you.
You're doing important work, and I just hope that more people can listen to this and realize that GMOs don't offer us any benefits, but a lot of detriments, and they're putting our environment at risk as well as our own personal health.
$0.5 billion has been spent to defeat 36 legislative bills in Congress and 21 states from labeling. Hey, all we want is a simple label.
That's right. We're entitled to know at least what is in our food and what we choose to eat. Well, thank you for listening, folks, and please vote yes on Proposition 37. Well, I see we have 1 more minute left. Howard, would you like to make a closing comment?
The amount of damage that's being scientifically documented by independent scientists and researchers that are not influenced by the industry is alarming. And I would strongly suggest that everyone that wants to take care of their family does everything they can to avoid GMOs, and the best way to do that is know what foods they're in. So labeling is extremely important.
Thank you again. Very quickly, if a food is labeled organic, it means it does not contain GMOs. So please take that into consideration when you make your food choices at this point. But in the future, after November 6th, I hope we will soon be seeing the label contains GMOs on our food. Thank you very much.